I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, tackling lightning rod issues on Capitol Hill during a historic address.
Buenos días a todos.
Before the papal visit moved on to the Big Apple, the Catholic leader's message to both sides of the aisle.
And I think he bridged the gap between liberal and conservative.
Most of all, as a peace leader, he has done a lot for peace activism.
And why is San Diego Unified School Board president under fire? I'm Peggy Pico with a closer look at the accusations. Also ahead, it'll be a grand slam for the moon. When and where you can see the super harvest lunar eclipse, blood moon, this weekend.
So we started having apples and pears at the end of August, and we've had fruit throughout September.
Signs of autumn in the East County, the weather patterns causing folks to get a jump start on the apple season. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. The next stop on the papal tour, New York City. Pope Francis delivered an evening prayer service at St. Patrick's Cathedral. He wrapped up 3 days in Washington, serving lunch to some of the homeless after speaking to D.C. lawmakers this morning. It's the first ever papal address to a joint meeting of Congress. Pope Francis urged lawmakers to embrace immigrants, called for action to counter climate change, and he spoke out against fundamentalism of all kinds.
A delicate balance is required to combat violence perpetrated in the name of a religion, an ideology, or an economic system, while also safeguarding religious freedom, intellectual freedom, and individual freedoms.
The Pope also said the family is threatened more than ever before. Pundits say he was alluding to the ruling legalizing gay marriage.
Buenos días a todos.
That's the response after his landmark speech. Thousands of people cheering on the Capitol lawn and the National Mall. Pope Francis greeting them from a balcony. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle stood by his side. In Spanish, the pontiff asked the crowd to pray for him. The crowd outside the Capitol included iNewsSource reporter Joanne Faryon. She witnessed the historic speech from the National Mall, then caught up with some other San Diegans who watched it from inside the Capitol.
We really weren't sure how close we would get to the Capitol building, where Pope Francis was delivering his address. All week, this city has been warned about traffic and massive crowds. But we did get fairly close with relative ease. Jumbotrons were set up on the lawns of the National Mall. Before the Pope's address, it felt more like an environmental rally, with singers and speakers talking about climate change. But then Pope Francis appeared on the screen. Some of his remarks that got the biggest cheers: America continues to be the land of dreams. Abolishing the death penalty when he said, "I'm convinced this way is the best." And his comment about all of us being foreigners. I caught up with two San Diego women who had an even closer view. They won tickets to see the Pope's address from their local Congresswoman, Susan Davis. Was there something else that particularly resonated with you with regard to his address to Congress?
Definitely when he spoke about humanity and social justice. That was key to me as a daughter of immigrants, and he's a son of immigrants. It was very important, as I do believe that we have to not only continue to open our arms and receive individuals, but continue the social justice of it, not to get too political, but to continue accepting this country of immigrants.
So why did you decide to enter this lottery to come to D.C. to see the Pope?
My family's Catholic, and I grew up as Catholic. That's the first reason. And the second reason, of course, is because I admire the Pope, not just as a religious leader, but most of all as a peace leader. He has done a lot for peace activism and just advancing peace relations between Cuba and the U.S. That it's amazing.
Both women said this event was especially meaningful to them because Pope Francis speaks to them. They said the long journey, the cost of traveling to Washington, and the long lines, they were all worth it. In Washington, D.C., I'm iNews Source reporter Joanne Faryon.
A coalition of faith and environmental justice leaders gathered outside of St. Joseph's Cathedral in San Diego to draw attention to the Pope's call to tackle climate change. The group works with young leaders of color. They say the Pope's message on climate change is consistent with his focus on economic issues and the poor.
These effects are disproportionately affecting people of color. And I think that the Pope recognizes how social justice and climate justice are intertwined.
Others who watched today's speech before Congress say they were impressed by how Pope Francis was received.
Everybody was in agreement that what he had to say was important, and I think he bridged the gap between liberal and conservative.
In New York, the Pope will speak to the UN General Assembly tomorrow and visit the 9/11 memorial site. Of course, we will have more on the papal visit on KPBS radio and online at kpbs.org. Just in the nick of time, opponents of a proposed new shopping center on a Carlsbad lagoon turned in petition signatures to the city clerk today. It's the second time boxes of signatures have been submitted asking for a public vote on a new shopping center on the shores of a nearby lagoon. Earlier this summer, the developer collected more than 9,000 signatures from registered voters. They got a vote, but it wasn't public. The Carlsbad Council unanimously approved the plan last month. Now, some neighbors have a problem with it because the developer avoided a review under the state's Environmental Quality Act. Neighbors in Sherman Heights protested today over broken streets and potholes. KPBS reporter Matt Bowler says community members complain they've been ignored by City Hall for years.
And finally this week, after years and years of being promised that these streets were going to be fixed, some of the work began.
That's Councilman David Alvarez talking about the Sherman Heights Street Repair Project. Residents worry the project will stop short if San Diego's politicians lose the political will to pay for it, leaving the streets potholed and broken. Sylvia Leone, a longtime Sherman Heights resident, says her community has been ignored by one City Hall administration after another.
So I believe we've been neglected by, our mayors in the city of San Diego.
Leone says she and her neighbors grew tough during long political battles.
We always have to fight and wait years before we get a stop light or a stop sign.
Alvarez says yes, San Diego is behind in fixing roads everywhere, but he questions why certain neighborhoods get fixed before others.
Anybody who drives around San Diego can tell the differences between communities and between neighborhoods, and it's very evident.
As if to prove his point, I saw a crew digging up the old road and laying a new one as I drove from Sherman Heights on Market Street into downtown. Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
Firefighters from around the state are on the front lines of 9 major wildfires. One of the biggest near Napa Valley caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. An emergency spending bill on Capitol Hill calls for $700 million to fight wildfires in California and western states. Scam artists are now the big worry for property owners who lost homes and treasured possessions. Insurance companies have set up at 2 fire sites to help those folks file claims. State experts are warning people of so-called public adjusters.
There's a group of people called public adjusters. They'll offer to help you negotiate your claim with the insurance company, but they don't work for free. They work for a percentage of your insurance claim.
The State Department of Insurance says the safest way to avoid scams is to work directly with your insurance company. We first told you about a San Diego school board leader under fire. There may be an investigation into board president Marne Foster. She's accused of taking advantage of her position of power. Peggy Pico takes a look at the allegations.
San Diego Unified School Board members will meet next week to determine if there will be an independent investigation into the allegations against School Board President Marne Foster. Here with the details and lingering questions is Voice of San Diego reporter Mario Corran, whose series of articles chronicles the story. And Mario, there's so many parts to this. First, tell us about the accusations against Marne Foster involving a fundraiser she held for her sons.
Sure. So sometime, I believe it was in July, sometime this summer, Ms. Foster, as a school board member, held a private fundraiser for her sons. I think the focus was to get them back to college. The problem with that was that she used district resources to sort of promote the event. She called on connections that she had within the school district to come support, which they did, and they donated money. So it's sort of a red flag that it raised early on.
And what was the school board's response to that?
Well, one of the school board members, John Lee Evans, in fact, was at the event and donated, I believe it was $100. So even John Lee Evans, talking to him right after that, didn't see much of a problem with that. And at the time, I'm not sure that he knew she had used district resources or that he had apparently known there were district connections there. But I didn't have the sense that he knew it was problematic even then.
But later on, it seemed like it did become problematic. What was Foster's response?
So it sort of blew up, the story sort of blew up and got a lot of attention. Hoping to quell some of that, she put out a statement that it was sort of an apology, and I say sort of an apology because she called it a mistake of the heart. It said that basically she was just being a parent, doing what a parent does by trying to help her kids, and she didn't follow the proper format, but it wasn't malicious or intentional.
Well, the story doesn't end there. Run us through some of the other key components of what's going on here. Sure.
So this is a story that's been sort of brewing since summer, basically summer of last year. So it's been brewing for a while now. Some of the accusations were that she was heavily involved in the decision to remove a well-regarded principal from the School of Creative Performing Arts, where Miss Foster's son happened to have Miss Foster happened to have a son at the time. So right, attending the school, and there was accusations that she was involved somehow in having the removal of Mitzi Lizarraga, the principal there. And there was also something to do with the school counselor, the head school counselor. Right. So all that it centers around a negative college evaluation letter that was written on behalf of her son. So Kim Abigate, head counselor of the school, wrote an evaluation letter that Miss Foster didn't like. It basically said there was no basis to recommend the student to college. And now through email chains, we can see that when Miss Foster found out about that, she was furious, and she demanded action at the school. She demanded that the letter that she didn't like be retracted and a new one be added. And was it? It was added shortly thereafter. We saw that the counselor who wrote the negative evaluation, or what she deemed to be negative, she was punished. Investigation targeted her, and she was eventually suspended for 9 days. She said it was without pay, cost her about $6,000. So the evidence, the way the evidence lines up, it seems like Marne Foster had a lot to do with the way that was handled. What about the concerns about Superintendent Cindy Martin's involvement? Right, and I think that that's probably one of the bigger implications, one of the bigger questions in this whole ordeal, is that we see Cindy Martin, as superintendent, copied on emails from early on, showing at least she was aware of what was going on. So maybe she wasn't behind some of this, but was that emails from Marne Foster? There was emails between Marne Foster and a senior district manager in regards to a plan that they'd come up with on how to deal with this and how to handle it. And we see that at least Cindy Martin was copied on that and aware of it. Now, so far, school district officials, though, have defended Marne Foster. And aside from the possible investigation that we spoke of earlier into the matter that may be decided on early this week or early next week, what else could happen in this? All right, so on Tuesday night, the board met for a closed session meeting. All right, so they retired to a room where they talked amongst themselves for 3 hours. 3 hours later, they emerge and they say that they've approved a possible investigation into the fundraising actions and into a legal claim that may have been fraudulently filed. Okay, so and from there might be a lawsuit, or do we know? We have to start there. So basically, the investigation isn't moving forward yet. I think procedurally they have to talk about it during an open meeting and approve this independent investigation that could come about. Okay. All right. Well, we'll be following this. Voice of San Diego reporter Mario Caran, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
The The fall season, or autumn, is officially here. That's when San Diegans flock to Julian for horse carriage rides and everything apples. But KPBS reporter Susan Murphy tells us if you want to pick your own apples this season, you'll want to head to the orchard soon.
The historic town of Julian in San Diego's backcountry is known for apple picking, apple cider, and apple pie. At 4,200 feet elevation, the mountain climate is usually perfect for growing the fruit.
Apples have been planted in Julian since the 1850s, 1860s. Around the turn of the century, Julian apples were winning competitions and state fairs across the country.
Teak Nichols with the Julian Apple Growers Association says the big harvest month used to be October, but this year's ongoing warm and dry conditions led to ripened fruit 2 months early.
So we started having apples and pears at the end of August, and we've had fruit throughout September.
Nichols says growing apples requires nearly 1,000 hours of cool temperatures called chill hours.
So a chill hour is any amount of time below 45 degrees, and that's what helps the trees form their fruit for the next year.
Despite 18 straight months of above average temperatures, some orchards have thrived, like Vulcan Valley Apple Farm, where hundreds of trees still have some hanging fruit. Other orchards have already run out of fruit or have fallen victim to drought. Some farmers rely on rain during the winter months so they don't have to spend as much money on water.
Julian started with dry farming where there wasn't irrigation, and now in order to keep an orchard going and viable, you do need irrigation.
And just like the early harvest, Julian's annual Apple Days Festival is also being held earlier than usual. Nearly 5,000 visitors are expected to descend upon the town this weekend for festivities, fun, and apples.
So a Julian apple, when you get it, is fresh, delicious, and because of our climate, some of the best tasting apples you've ever had.
Susan Murphy, KPBS News.
Roxbury russet. That's a good one.
Well, fall is here, but San Diegans might not know it without a calendar. Still on the warm side, 80s by the beaches over the next few days, 90s for the inland valleys, clear in the mountains with 80s there, and triple digits back in the desert. Skywatchers will be looking to the stars this weekend. Peggy Pico tells us what makes this lunar eclipse so colorful.
For the first time in 32 years, a total lunar eclipse will coincide with a supermoon this weekend, and it's supposed to be pretty spectacular. Here to explain why is my guest, Jerry Hilburn. He's with San Diego's Astronomy Association and also an astronomy advisor to the Reuben H. Fleet Science Center. And Jerry, lunar eclipse, supermoon, blood moon, it all sounds pretty intense. So what's really going to happen this weekend?
Well, there's really three events that are occurring at the same moment in time. There's a supermoon, which is actually the moment when the moon moves closest to the Earth in its orbit. It'll be about 225,000 miles away. And when that happens, it's 14% larger in diameter and 30% brighter than when it's further away. The second portion of the event will be the lunar eclipse, and that's when the moon is actually moved into the Earth's shadow. And that occurs roughly at 7 o'clock, right as the moon is rising. So we're going to actually see a red moon as the moon is rising up to the east.
And that red moon, you're talking about that blood moon we're seeing on our screen here. What makes it so red?
Well, the atmosphere, the sun's passing around the Earth's atmosphere, and all of the color is being filtered out but red. And so when it strikes the moon on the other side of the shadow, that refracted light is only red, and so the surface of the moon appears to be red. It can get darker when there's more volcanic activity or fires have put a lot of particulates in the upper atmosphere. So it varies in intensity.
So why is this event important? Is there some sort of a historical or scientific significance to it?
I think it's more of a cultural significance from the past. The Mayans and the Mesopotamians were frightened by the event, and of course the one thing about it is that you can see the moon whether you're in the city or you're in the country. The light pollution doesn't block it, and so when things happen with the moon, our imaginations are fired.
How long are we going to be able to see it here in San Diego, and where are some of the best places to see it?
It lasts, the actual eclipse itself lasts about an hour, but from roughly 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock, you'll notice the effect of the eclipse on the moon itself.
And what night is that then?
That is Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, and it's best to be up in a high position where you can look down to the horizon as it's rising.
Oh, so up on a hill someplace.
Right, or on top of a building, or any location where you're above the horizon a little bit so that you can watch the moon come up around 6:45. And when it comes up, it'll already be blood red.
So now some people may wonder about this, but the solar eclipse, is there going to need to be any special or protective eyewear in order to look at it?
A solar eclipse is a little bit different. That's when the Earth passes.
The lunar, right.
Yeah, when the moon moves in front of the Earth and blocks the light from the sun. Now, we have a really important event coming up in 2017 for the solar eclipse that'll be passing across the mid-United States. But no, there's no need for any special protection.
Because this is a lunar eclipse and not a solar eclipse, right?
That's right.
Well, now, if you miss this lunar party Sunday night, this weekend, how long is it going to be before we can see it again?
Well, the lunar eclipses occur twice a year, but being in a position where you can see a full eclipse is about, every few years. And then usually twice that happens. The next time we'll see a lunar eclipse and a supermoon is in 2033.
So you got a little bit of time.
A little bit.
Get out there. Get out there Sunday night. Now, how about for scientists? Do we know everything we need to know about this as far as the moon, or is there something we can learn from it?
Well, not really much from this. It's the solar eclipses that are important. In 1919, Eddington went out and used the solar eclipse to verify general relativity, and this is what made Einstein famous. He predicted gravitational lensing around the sun, and that event is significant. Plus, we still can perform those same experiments now. But from a lunar perspective, it's more just the joy of seeing it turn red.
Right, the fun on it. Getting back to the solar eclipse, though, are there still things we can learn, even though we know quite a bit?
It's useful. Each time it occurs, it's useful for gravitational lensing measurements, and it also gives us quite an interesting look at the corona of the sun.
All right, excellent. Well, lunar eclipse Sunday night at 7.
Yeah, lunar eclipse Sunday night, supermoon, and it's the harvest moon.
All together. It's going to be a beautiful sight. Jerry Hilburn, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Imagine hiring 10 of the best playwrights in America, then not using a single word they've crafted. KPBS Arts reporter Beth Accomando looks at the creative decisions behind a new production at the Old Globe.
In musical theater, the recurring question is, which comes first, the words or the music? But in the case of In Your Arms, the answer was clear to composer Stephen Flaherty.
It really started with the words of the playwright, which oddly in this piece you never get to hear. So it's a very exciting and unusual and unique piece.
Unusual because In Your Arms commissioned 10 American playwrights to write on the theme of romantic destiny, and then replace their written words with a vocabulary of dance and music.
It started from their imaginings of who these characters might be and what culture they might live in, what time. That was really the jumping off point for me, and then I had to find a musical vocabulary to interpret each of these very unique and specific worlds. So basically this show, every aspect of it is from scratch.
Which meant that for dancers like Donna McKechnie, they were dealing with changes on a daily basis during rehearsals.
Yeah, this is like literally off the press, There is an ending that's different than the one we did today. Isn't that fun? Because we didn't have time to put an ending on it. But it'll have a different ending in that scene. And I can't wait to learn it.
There was a learning curve for everyone as each vignette developed a life of its own. For Alfred Urey's Love with the Top Down, Flaherty decided to compose moments of silence.
It starts with two kids in Lover's Lane, and they're in a convertible. And it's about really the awkwardness between moments, like when do I put my hand over, when do I try to kiss her now, or do I wait? And originally it was more through composed, and then we began to think, no, it's got to be about those awkward pauses. And so we actually began scoring that in and using them in a way to make a point.
So it was carefully constructed to figure out when those moments are, but also, like as in the Urey piece, we also found that silence was our friend and lack of movement, because what your body even naturally just does in a situation like that. People tend to stop or tense, or they're left frozen in a situation. So that was really fun to play with too.
But music and movement also became the elements that tied all the different sets of lovers together.
So I had to find a way musically to create really a really diverse palette of 10 different musical worlds. But at the same time, I had to find a filament that stitches them together, that binds them together.
There's one theme that we kind of bookend the show with, and that is Terrence McNally wrote a beautiful piece about two older ex-dancers. and they look back on their life together, and it's basically it's a long walk down a beach. So we open the show with that kind of idea that she's in this place of love and has to kind of come through it, and she does, remembering how they used to dance, and that kind of takes us through the piece, and we end with them.
Each couple, even though they're very unique and there's specific genders, specific cultures, specific time period, they could all actually be the same couple, morphing in different ways through time.
With dance and music providing a universal language to weave all these stories together.
We could do this exact same show anywhere, and people will be just as touched, they will understand it just as much, because there isn't a barrier of any kind. It's truly this universal language, and that it's great.
In Your Arms serves up an exploration of love that requires no translation. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
In Your Arms runs through October 25th on the Old Globe Theater's main stage. Here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom on Morning Edition. Thousands of people in rural areas have run out of water because of the drought, the length some folks have to go to have enough water for drinking and washing. That's tomorrow on KPBS Radio. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.